Hare Krishna. Haribol. I hope it's going to be big enough. It may be a bit tight. It's okay? Right. It's our pleasure. Great pleasure. Okay, devotees, so that's about it. Tonight is our 23rd evening of Bhakti Vaibhava. We are in the first canto, chapter 6, and if I remember correctly, don't tell me, it's verse 29. Aha, okay. Right. Very good. So first of all, some prayers. Nama Om Vishnupadaya Krishna Prestaya Bhutale Shrimati Bhakti Vedanta Swaminiti Namane Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Pracharne Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Pastya Chadesha Tarni Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadha Shivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Vanchakalpaturubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhya Evacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Yes, so devotees, we're in section D, the fourth section, the title of which is He, means Narada Muni in his previous life, son of the maidservant. He leaves his body and becomes the great sage Narada Muni. It begins with verse 27 and goes on to verse 36, and we're starting tonight with verse 29. Right, so translation. At the end of the millennium, when the personality of Godhead, Lord Narayan, lay down within the water of devastation, Brahma began to enter into him along with all creative elements. And I also entered through his breathing. Hare Krishna. Amazing. It seems Narada Muni remembers this. Can you imagine? No, you can't. Neither can I. It's just another dimension. All right, so there we go. Right. So let's go through the purport here. Well, Narada's the son of Brahma. Narada as Narada, of course, as Narada Muni. He's the son of Lord Brahma. And Lord Krishna is known as the son of Vasudeva. Note, not Vasudev, with, at least in our books, with the line over the first A. You must know what I mean. Not Vasudeva, because that's Krishna, the son of Vasudeva, with a short A, as you can see if you look at the purport there. So, Prabhupada makes interesting point. The personality of Godhead and his liberated devotees like Narada, that means those who are already liberated. They are associates of the Lord, or liberated at least, yeah. So, the personality of Godhead and his liberated devotees like Narada appear in the material world by the same process. Well, let's just read through. As it is said in the Bhagavad Gita, the birth and activities of the Lord are all transcendental. Which verse is that said in? Devotees, just tell me the verse number. 4:9. Is he right or wrong, devotees? He could, you never know. What do you think? Anyway, he's right. Yeah. Janma karma chame divyam evam yo veti tatvataha. His janma and his karma are all divyam. Means, in this context at least, it means spiritual, transcendental. So therefore, according to authorized opinion, the birth of Narada as the son of Brahma is also a transcendental pastime. His appearance and disappearance are practically on the same level as that of the Lord. The Lord and his devotees are therefore simultaneously one and different as spiritual entities. They belong to the same category of transcendence. Whoa. Okay, anyway, that's pretty deep. Right, so next is verse 30. After 4,300,000,000 solar years, when Brahma awoke to create again by the will of the Lord, all the rishis like Marichi, Angira, Atri, and so on were created from the transcendental body of the Lord. And I also appeared along with them. Wow, this is just, anyway, these things happen like that with these types of personalities. So Brahma awoke after 4,300,000,000 solar years. Anyway, he must have felt very refreshed after such a long nap. All right. So let's have a look at the purport here. So actually, the duration of a day of Brahma is the same, 320,000,000 years. And, I would say that what appears in the verse as after 4,300,000,000, it's just a paraphrasing. Brahma's day and Brahma's night are the same length. Yeah, so it's the same. As they say, the same difference. So right, his day is that long, his night is. I don't know if he sleeps for his entire night. But anyway, he woke up at the end of the night. And that's, yes, actually, that's stated in Bhagavad Gita. In fact, if you have a look at the Sanskrit of this verse, you'll see it begins, Sahasra Yuga Paryante. In Bhagavad Gita, the verse which is explaining about the day of Brahma and the length of the cycle of 1,000 yugas, it says Sahasra Yuga Paryantam, which is the same, but it's just got a slight grammatical change there at the end of the last word. So, right, then back to the purport. So that his day is so long, and Prabhupada says he rests at night for the same period within Garbhodakshaya Vishnu. Of course, within the universe, it's not within Mahavishnu, because Mahavishnu's outside of the universe, and Brahma's definitely within the universe. So he goes into the body of Garbhodakshaya Vishnu, who is his, as Prabhupada says, generator. So after the sleeping period, when it's time for creation again, through Brahma, all the great rishis appear, also out of Garbhodakshaya Vishnu. Narada appears. So this means Narada appears in the same transcendental body, just as a man awakes from sleep in the same body. Narada is eternally free to move in all parts of the transcendental and material creations of the Almighty. He appears and disappears in his own transcendental body, which is without distinction of body and soul, unlike conditioned beings. Yes, of course, we know his service is to preach all over. He's a real traveling mendicant, and it includes going to the spiritual world from time to time. So he can't have a material body, just, earth, water, fire, air, and ether. Otherwise he wouldn't be able to enter the spiritual world. Or if he did, he wouldn't be able to stay long. Like Devasa, he entered, but he couldn't stay long. He had to leave. Wrong type of body. So Narada has a transcendental body. Transcendental body functions in the spiritual world, but it can also function in the material world. Whereas the material body, except in some extremely rare cases, the material body can only function in the material world. And, not long ago in a class, I forget where I was, but we mentioned how in Nectar of Devotion, there's a pastime where the one very poor devotee wants to do deity worship, but he can't afford anything. And so he attends a class in the Sri Sri Radha Radhanath temple, chats. And there, whoever was giving class, maybe it was Raghunath Bhatta Prabhu, anyway, whoever it was, said that if you think about doing devotional service, it is the same as actually doing it. So that devotee got into thinking about doing the most wonderful devotional service, deity worship. And in his mind, he would cook, he would dress the deities, he would cook for them, offer, do arati, and just all these things. And one time in his mind, he was cooking an offering, including some sweet rice, which generally should not be hot. So he touched it with his finger in his mind, just simply in his mind. He touched the sweet rice to see if it was still hot, and it was. And in his meditation, his finger got burnt. And he got sort of thrown out of his meditation, and he saw his actual finger was burnt. And Nectar of Devotion Prabhupada describes that the Supreme Lord was watching from Vaikuntha, and he saw this, the finger getting burnt, the real finger, and he laughed. And then he told some of his associates, just go down there, get him, and just bring him back. So they took him back in his same body. Now, we assume, in fact, it can only be that his body was then transformed. Devasa Muni went in, but his body was not transformed. And he had to come back. Okay, so the general idea is transcendental body, either spiritual world, material world, no problem. Just ordinary material body, material world, of course. Spiritual world, highly unlikely. Not totally impossible, but the unlikeliness is pretty overwhelming. So, okay. So he comes and goes, appears and disappears in his own transcendental body. Verse 31, since then, by the grace of the Almighty Vishnu, I travel everywhere without restriction, both in the transcendental world and in the three divisions of the material world. This is because I'm fixed in unbroken devotional service to the Lord. When, oh, when will that day come? Fixed in unbroken devotional service. So, right. Yeah, interesting little point just from the actual translation, that he travels everywhere without restriction, both in the transcendental world and in the three divisions of the material world, means he goes to the hellish planets. It has to mean that, because that's what the lower third, division of the three worlds is. It's the hellish planets, all the way down to the very worst, just the very worst. But he also goes to the heavenly planets. Yeah. All right. So that's verse 31. Let's have a look at the purport. So Prabhupada talks about the three worlds. Bhur Bhuva Swa. Bhur is the lower planets. Bhuva is these planets. And Swa is the heavenly planets. Let me just check one thing. Anyway, I think that's the correct. I think Bhuva, let's just see. Yeah, Bhuva. So, on Bhur Bhuva, from the Gayatri Mantra, or from my computer just threw a wobbly. Okay, anyway, so yes, and that Veena was given to Narada by Lord Krishna himself. That's interesting, isn't it? Where am I? Given to him by Lord Krishna. And Prabhupada makes interesting comment that as a pure devotee of the Lord, so actually, the Veena was given, it's described in the Linga Purana, which is one of the Tamasic Puranas actually, and this is confirmed by Srila Jiva Goswami. And so Srila Prabhupada gets into a whole thing about Vedic music. All the different note meters and so on like that. But Prabhupada makes the point, just after where Prabhupada talks about all these meters, Sha, Ri, Ga, Ma, Pa, Da, and Ni. Prabhupada says, as a pure devotee of the Lord, Sri Narada Dev is always fulfilling his obligation to the Lord for his gift of the obligation, of the instrument. He's always fulfilling his obligation to the Lord for his gift of the instrument. And thus he's always engaged in singing the Lord's transcendental glories. If the Lord makes some special arrangement for you to get something for using in his devotional service, you must know you must use it in his devotional service. Don't just, classify it as just another bit of paraphernalia. If the Lord makes some special arrangement for you, then you should use it in his service. I didn't finish the paragraph before, did I? I mean the purport. Yeah, I wanted to look up, just make sure that bhuva is the middle planetary systems, which it is. So let's just go through briefly the purport of verse 31. So there are three divisions: urdhva, topmost; madhya, middle; adho, downward planets. So, above the topmost, above Brahmaloka, is the spiritual world, which is unlimited. And it's full of the self-illuminated Vaikuntha planets inhabited by the Lord. So Narada, well, we already talked about that. He can go to all these planets without restriction. He can go to the spiritual world, come to the material world. He doesn't need some special machinery or paraphernalia. He doesn't have to have an oxygen tank or, something, whatever, as the humans do. Because he's transcendental. He's really transcendental. So then, well, here, of course, everyone is influenced by the modes. Narada is transcendental. And, interesting point, the causeless mercy of Lord Vishnu is unparalleled, and such mercy is perceived by the devotees only by the grace of the Lord. I mean, you could take that, is perceived by the devotees only by the grace of the Lord, or you could say is perceived by the devotees only by the grace of the Lord. Anyway, it's sort of the same thing, really. I mean, an extra comma would have been good there. So therefore the devotees don't fall down because they've got so much mercy and they're transcendental. But the materialists, they do fall down, or in other words, they're always fallen down. Prabhupada spoke about the impersonalists. That verse, 10th Canto, Chapter 2, verse 32, if you know it at all. How does it begin? Anyway, I forget how it begins, but famous verse which talks about the impersonalists. I know the verse, I've quoted it so many times. But I don't want to start searching around my computer. Patantyada, how does it begin? That's what I'm asking. Arura, no. Parampadam tata. That's not the first line. But don't worry. The point is patantyada. Patantyada, they fall down again. And then Prabhupada explains, actually, to be an impersonalist means you are already fallen. So, you're just falling to a different fallen position. And what to speak of the fruit of workers who are just obviously very, very fallen. Yes. So now these other rishis, that's an interesting point, isn't it? Rishis like Marichi and the others mentioned in the verse, they can't do that. They're within the material world. Yes. Marichi is an authority in fruit of work. Sanaka Sanatan, they're authorities in philosophical speculations. But Narada is the prime authority for devotional service. And all the great authorities in devotional service follow in the footsteps of Narada in regard to following Narada Bhakti Sutra. And therefore all the devotees are unhesitatingly qualified to enter into the kingdom of God, Vaikuntha. So, yeah, sorry about that. Now, on back to 32, let me just read the verse again. And thus I travel, constantly singing the transcendental message of the glories of the Lord, vibrating this instrument called a veena, which is surcharged with transcendental sound, and which was given to me by Lord Krishna, as Srila Prabhupada points out, that is described in the Linga Purana and confirmed by Srila Jiva Goswami. So that instrument is identical with Krishna and Narada, because both of them are transcendental. And the sound vibrated by that instrument, it can't be material. And therefore the glories and pastimes which he is broadcasting with it, they're also transcendental. And then Prabhupada gets into this thing about going through the singing meters, well, I mean, maybe not exactly meters. Sare Gama. They're notes, right? They're notes, isn't it? Sare Gama. They're notes, actual musical notes. Yeah. So they're also transcendental, although they're used very materially. nowadays, and they're specifically meant for using with transcendental songs. So Narada's always obliged to use his veena. I don't think that he has to be told that, hey, pick up your veena, play your veena. Don't you try and sing without your veena. I'm pretty sure he doesn't have to be told that. That's Narada Muni. He just uses his veena. Like, a handful of these, like, really famous guitarists at least from my days, like Jimi Hendrix. He slept with his guitar. Yeah, in the same bed, and he would hold on to the guitar. Yeah, so Haribol didn't do him a lot of good, although he was a very, very clever guitarist, but he died at the age of 26. Krishna, doing lots of nonsense. So, right. So Narada's always using his veena and singing about the Lord, and is therefore infallible. He's just so fully engaged, totally fully engaged. As he says, and thus I travel constantly singing. If someone tells you they constantly are doing something, normally what it means is regularly, and not actually 24/7. I mean, the only thing which we constantly do 24/7 is breathe. Nothing else. Absolutely nothing else. I mean, digest food, and the hair grows out of wherever on our bodies, but an actual conscious, or sort of something like a conscious activity, breathing is the only thing we do constantly. But Narada is actually constantly playing the veena and singing the glories of the Lord. And therefore Bhagavad Gita 9:14, satatam kirtayanto mam, talking about the Mahatmas, or great souls. They have no business in life except singing the transcendental glories of the Lord, following in Narada's footsteps. All right, so let's see now. We're going on to verse 33. And there is an analogy here in verse 33. Okay. Yeah, I'll tell you it when we get to it in the purport. So verse 33. The Supreme Lord Sri Krishna, whose glories and activities are pleasing to hear, at once appears on the seat of my heart as if called for, as soon as I begin to chant his holy activities. Well, you remember from yesterday, the Lord appeared before Narada in his previous lifetime as the son of the maidservant, but only momentarily. But now, Narada's reached a much more advanced position. The Lord told him in what we read yesterday that you are not fully qualified. You're not fully purified. Yes, so you have to wait. Yeah. People who are not fully purified cannot see me. But now he's seeing the Lord at once, appears on the seat of my heart as if called for. as soon as I begin to chant his holy activities, and he's chanting all the time. So it's really pretty amazing, the what would you call it, the transformation of Narada. So in the purport, Srila Prabhupada makes the point, the Lord is not different from his name, form, pastimes, sound vibrations thereof. So as soon as a pure devotee engages in hearing, chanting, and remembering the name, fame, and activities of the Lord, at once the Lord becomes visible. This is talking about the pure devotee. Of course, there are sometimes discussions about what does this term pure devotee really mean? And it definitely appears that there's quite some flexibility. There's the famous story right in the early days when I think there were 6 temples in ISKCON. And someone wrote a letter to Prabhupada asking, how many pure devotees are there in ISKCON? And Prabhupada asked his assistant, how many devotees do we have? And the assistant said, well, in New York we have this number, Los Angeles that number, San Francisco we have such and such number. Then there was a temple in a place called Buffalo. Buffalo we have some number. And in USA there must have been one other. And in Montreal, in Canada, they also had a temple, and we have so many. And he added them up and got, I think, as I recall, 125 pure devotees. And then Prabhupada said, yes, there are 125 pure devotees in ISKCON. Very famous pastime. But they're not like these pure devotees. Yeah. That the Lord at once becomes visible to the transcendental eyes of the pure devotee by reflecting himself on the mirror of the heart by spiritual television. Gosh, that's amazing, isn't it? Spiritual television. So that's the analogy. The analogy of the spiritual television. And let me just check the analogy again. The analogy is the Lord at once becomes visible to the transcendental eyes of the pure devotee by reflecting himself on the mirror of his heart by spiritual television. So let's keep going through the purport. So the Lord appears like that in the heart of the pure devotee. And of course we know in Brahma Samhita, Lord Brahma says, Premanjana Churita Bhakti Valochanena Santa Sadaiva Hridayeshu Valokayanti. That the devotees whose eyes have been anointed or treated with the ointment of love, Prema Anjana. Anjana means a type of ointment, you can say. Kajal. Yeah, Prema Anjana, the ointment of love. Then Santa, the devotees, Sadaiva, always. Santa Sadaiva, Hridayeshu, within the heart. See the Lord. Prabhupada, after the famous program in Glasgow, where the member of the audience got up and walked up to the front in the question time and in a loud voice said, I am God, to Prabhupada. And Prabhupada very famously replied, you are not God, G-O-D, You are dog, D-O-G. And everyone roared with laughter. And there were hundreds of people in the hall. They roared with laughter and clapped. The man turned around, walked out, and was not seen again. So after that, Prabhupada, our temple was in Edinburgh, which is an hour or a little more, something, at least an hour's drive from Glasgow, something like that. So Prabhupada was driven back after the program, and he went to his room, and some devotees gathered, and a devotee quoted that verse, which I just mentioned, Premanjana Charita Bhakti Vaibhava, and asked Srila Prabhupada, is it really true that the devotees, pure devotees, they see the Lord within their hearts? And Prabhupada, looking around the room as he spoke, sort of up and around, Prabhupada said, yes, the pure devotees see Krishna everywhere. And the devotees got the distinct impression Prabhupada was seeing Krishna. So, okay. So therefore, anyway, spiritual television, the purport goes on that therefore such a pure devotee experiences the presence of the Lord everywhere, at every moment. So, and Prabhupada makes, it's a very interesting and important point. Natural psychology. Everyone likes to hear and enjoy their personal glories enumerated by others. Yes. Sometimes we test the devotees in that regard. I mean, during a class, if someone, for whatever reason, we glorify a devotee that, Raghunath Bhatta Prabhu is just such a wonderful devotee. And normally that devotee then smiles. But we've got masks on, so we can't see him. He's smiling. Of course it's true, yeah. So anyway, so where does that natural psychology come from? It comes from Krishna. Because psychological characteristics visible in the individual souls are just reflections of the same psychology in the Absolute Lord. So, yeah, Krishna likes to hear himself glorified and appreciated. And when it happens, he becomes blissful. He becomes blissful. But anyway, still, it's not astonishing, Prabhupada says, that when the Lord hears a devotee chanting his glories, that the Lord is attracted to come. Therefore we, even though the Lord may not necessarily appear before us when we start chanting, we should carry on chanting, because sooner or later he will appear before your eyes. Don't hold your breath, but sooner or later. So, since he's absolute, he can appear in his picture. It's identical. The picture, his glorification, these two things are identical. So, as Prabhupada says at the end, Narada Muni penetrates into the presence of the Lord by the transcendental chanting. right devotees. Verse 34. It is personally experienced by me that those who are always full of cares and anxieties, due to desiring contact of the senses with their objects, can cross the ocean of nescience on a most suitable boat. The constant chanting of the transcendental activities of the personality of Godhead. So interesting, he's talking about the transcendental activities, not necessarily just the transcendental holy names. In the Sanskrit, the term is Hari Charya. Hari Charya. Like we know, Acharya means one who teaches by his activities. So Charya means activities. And that's an interesting point. Right. So, okay, we can cross the ocean of nescience on the boat of the constant chanting of the transcendental activities of the Lord, or transcendental holy names too. So, right, in the purport, Srila Prabhupada makes a few points. The living entity can't be silent, he can't be inactive, must be doing something, thinking of something, or talking about something, must be. And of course, generally the people in this material world, they think and talk about sense gratification. What I did on the weekend. I went to the beach and I, did this and that. And then I drank some liquor and and, all these types of things. So they think and discuss about such subjects. But this doesn't give them satisfaction. Rather, it's the opposite. As they think about and discuss such subjects, they become progressively more anxious. Yeah. They don't become satisfied, they become full with cares and anxieties. This is Maya. This is really typical, just typical Maya. It's just such a shame, actually, that which is not. So that which cannot give them satisfaction is accepted as an object for satisfaction. You can't find satisfaction here. And therefore, there's Srila Prabhupada's famous story. The man who came home at night in the dark, got out of the car, dropped his car keys, no light in the garage. What to do? Can't find the keys. So he goes out on the road where there's a street light. He starts looking around there. And friend comes by and says, "Oh, you dropped something." Yeah. Dropped my keys. Where'd you drop them? Up in the garage. Well, why are you looking here? Because at least there's light here. This is obviously extreme stupidity at best, if not craziness. So of course, people don't know it because they're conditioned. They're in tamagun. There's so many things they don't know, but still they remain confident about success in material life. So, So Prabhupada makes the point. that Narada Muni makes the point, that satisfaction for such frustrated beings engaged in sense gratification is to chant always the activities of the Lord. Keep chanting, but change the subject matter, that's all. Yes. And no one can stop the thinking of the living entity. You can't stop the living entity thinking. Or feeling, thinking, feeling, willing, or working. Can't stop them. But you just have to change the subject matter. Think about different things. Will for Krishna conscious things. Work at Krishna conscious activities. So, just change the subject matter only. Instead of talking of the politics of a dying man, means the leaders are dying. Someone told me that someone told the current president of America, Biden, who is approaching 80, something like that, Biden said he's going to run for president again. And the other person said, "You're too old. Don't do it." Yeah. So they're dying men. All these politicians, generally they're old. Mugabe was old, really old. Yeah. So instead of talking of, material politics, the politics of a dying man, discuss the politics administered by the Lord. How did the Lord rule? Instead of relishing activities of the cinema artists, turn your attention to the activities of the Lord with his eternal associates like the gopis and Lakshmis, and so on and so forth. Because he does these things to help the conditioned souls, and they really help if you get into them. Yes, he's giving the opportunity to turn our attention to transcendence. And in this way, people can become elevated. So yes, like this, Prabhupada says, the conditioned soul will gradually be promoted to the transcendental position and easily cross the ocean of nescience, the source of all miseries. And Prabhupada concludes, well, this is Narada's personal experience, and we can have the same experience also if we begin to follow in the footsteps of the great sage, Narada Muni, the dearmost devotee of the Lord. So we go on to verse 35. There's an analogy here too. So here's the verse 35. It is true that by practicing restraint of the senses by the yoga system, one can get relief from the disturbances of desire and lust. But this is not sufficient to give satisfaction to the soul, for this satisfaction is derived from devotional service to the Lord. So, just to stop your senses from their disturbing involvement in desire and lust, which are disturbing in so many ways, that's not going to give you satisfaction. So the purport, there's a couple of points here. Yoga aims at controlling the senses. In mystic yoga, there's the practice of bodily exercises. There's the practice of bodily exercises for, becoming transcendental, finally being merged in transcendence. And in this way you control the senses, so you can merge into transcendence. And of course, the senses are really dangerous. And actually, the senses are like snakes. Yeah, Prabhupada says the senses are considered like venomous serpents, and the yoga system is just to control them. This is an analogy, by the way. The senses, the analogy is, the senses are like snakes. Yeah. The senses are like serpents there in the purport. But actually, Narada Muni, what does Narada Muni recommend? He recommends engaging in devotional service. It's more effective, more practical, and it just works so nicely. Otherwise, if you don't do that, and you just try to control your senses just mechanically, then it won't work, and you'll fall down. And where? Oh yeah, down the bottom. Okay, let's see. Vishvamitra, you know this story of Vishvamitra? Oh yeah, right. Bottom of this paragraph, sorry. So there are many instances of these yogis trying to control their senses mechanically, but failing. And a classic example is Vishvamitra, who had meditated for 60,000 years with his eyes closed, and he was still meditating. He was still meditating, and Menaka came. I mean, it's a long story, I won't get into it. But this girl, Menaka, came, and simply by hearing the sound of her ankle bells, his mind just came back. And he became attracted to this beautiful woman. But on the other hand, at the bottom of this paragraph, Thakur Haridas, what to speak of Menaka, who was beautiful. Maya Devi herself came. She has the whole total attractiveness of the material energy. Whew. If anyone's going to attract a male, it's going to be Maya Devi, more than Menaka. But Haridas was not attracted. Rather, he converted her, made her into a devotee. So the thing is now, paragraph 2. The whole idea is, and it's the whole idea, how many times we'll be coming across it. Whole idea is, without devotional service, the yoga system, dry philosophical speculation, none of these things will work. The person will fall down. So pure devotional service, no fruit of work, mystic yoga, no speculation. It's the foremost procedure to attain self-realization, and actually it's the only process, if we consider self-realization, to developing Krishna prema and entering into your eternal relationship with Krishna, which Prabhupada does refer to as self-realization in a few places here in the first canto. So, yeah, pure devotional service is transcendental. Yoga and jnana are subordinate. But when transcendental devotional service is mixed with a subordinate process, It's no longer transcendental. It's called mixed devotional service. That is a super crucial point if you're doing Bhakti Shastri. I promise you. Yeah. So, Vyasadeva, Prabhupada says, Srila Vyasadeva, the author of Srimad Bhagavatam, will gradually develop all these different systems of transcendental realization in the text. So now, 36, yeah. The last verse in this section, and it's almost the last verse of the chapter. In fact, I suspect we are going to finish the chapter this evening, which is fine. Oi, what? Right. Okay, verse 36. O Vyasadeva, you are freed from all sins. Thus I've explained by my birth and activities for self-realization as you asked. Don't forget, this is Narada speaking. So he tells him, you're freed from all sins. Thus I've explained my birth and activities for self-realization as you asked. All this will be conducive for your personal satisfaction also. It's going to help the people in general, but it's going to help you too. Well, help you? Yeah, it's going to help you feel satisfied. Right, so Prabhupada in the purport basically summarizes Narada Muni's story. Basically, essentially. So, all devotional activities, the process of devotion, from the beginning to the stage of transcendence, Narada's explained in response to Vyasa's questions. So here are the different things he's explained. Seeds of devotion are sown by transcendental association, and then they develop by hearing. Well, in the case of Narada, yeah, so with Narada, the seeds were sown by association, and then they gradually developed by him hearing the sages. Then the result of that hearing was detachment from worldliness, and therefore he was able to deal with the death of his mother at the age of 5 and take shelter completely of the Lord. And it's interesting, a sincere urge for having an interview with the Lord was also granted to him. That's interesting, isn't it? In other words, this is not exactly saying he had the urge. But what is really literally being said here is that he was given the urge. Just like in the second chapter, Sutta Goswami says that by serving the devotees, you get an affinity for hearing the messages of the Lord. And just in the next verse, he says that by doing that, you become free the Lord cleanses your heart. That's what he says. By doing that, the Lord cleanses your heart. So the Lord gives you the attraction, and when you sort of exercise the attraction, the Lord appreciates it and gives you some mercy. All right, so that urge for seeing the Lord was granted to him, even though it's not possible to see the Lord with mundane eyes. Then he explained how through devotional service, you get rid of all your accumulated reactions and everything. How his body was transformed into a spiritual body. Therefore, he was able to enter the spiritual abode, which only pure devotees can do. So all these things were experienced by Narada Muni. Yeah. And Prabhupada says, therefore by hearing such an authority, one can have some idea of the results of devotional life, which are hardly delineated even in the original texts of the Vedas, because they're by far mainly talking about going to the heavenly planets and how to do that. So this is really quite something. This entering the kingdom of God, Prabhupada says, in the Vedas and Upanishads, they're only indirect hints. Nothing's directly explained there. And Srimad Bhagavatam, therefore Srimad Bhagavatam, which does explain all these things, is the mature fruit of all the Vedic trees of knowledge. So we have still got 10 minutes. Let's just read verses 37 and 38. They are the last two verses in the chapter, I think. Last two verses. 37, 38, see if we can finish them without rushing. 37, Sutta Goswami said, thus addressing Vyasadeva, Srila Narada Muni took leave of him, and vibrating on his Veena instrument, he left to wander at his free will. So, purport, as usual, Prabhupada clarifies some things about life on the material level. Everyone's anxious for full freedom, but they can't move freely because they may think they're free, but actually they're bound up by the laws of material nature. So, yeah. But a devotee like Narada, who's always chanting the glories of the Lord, he's free to move, not just around this planet, like having a visa for every country or something like that. He can travel to the spiritual world because he's a devotee. And Prabhupada says, we can just imagine the extent and unlimitedness of his freedom, which is as good as that of the Lord. And Prabhupada makes the point, So, a couple of sentences down. Similarly, the transcendental system of devotional service is also free. It's also free. We're not selling it. It may or may not develop in a person, even after he's tried this and tried that and tried so many things. But, well, yeah, association of the devotee is free also. One may be fortunate to have it, or one may not have it, even after thousands of endeavors. Therefore, in all spheres of devotional service, freedom is the main pivot. Without freedom, there's no execution of devotional service. The freedom surrendered to the Lord does not mean that the devotee becomes dependent in every respect. That's a bit of a statement, yeah. To surrender unto the Lord through the transcendental medium of the spiritual master is to attain complete freedom of life. And let's just finish verse 38. Right, 38. All glory and success to Srila Narada Muni. This is Sutta Goswami. All glory and success to Srila Narada Muni, because he glorifies the activities of the personality of Godhead, and so doing, he himself takes pleasure and also enlivens all the distressed souls of the world. Yeah, so this is Sutta Goswami, like the previous verse 37. Distressed souls of the universe. So in the purport, Prabhupada explains, Narada Muni is playing his instrument, glorifying the activities of the Lord. Yes. Well, he's playing his instrument in order to glorify the activities of the Lord, plus to give relief to the miserable conditioned souls. No one's happy here. And what they say, what they feel is happiness, is Maya's illusion. The illusory energy of the Lord is so strong that even the hog who lives on filthy stool feels happy. No one can be truly happy within the material world. So this is the mission of Narada. He wanders around preaching, chanting, and Prabhupada concludes this chapter. That is the mission of all genuine devotees of the Lord, following the footsteps of that great sage, Narada. So this is a point we really have to take to heart, that one way or another, directly or indirectly or whatever, but somehow or other, we have to help with the distribution of Krishna consciousness. We do. And even if we're full-time pujari, for example, or full-time cook, we should do these things so that, for example, with the deities, when people come, not devotees, but just some people, come to the temple and see the deities, they think, oh, how beautiful, and they become attracted. I remember, I don't know if I've said this before, when we were traveling in Ireland in like 1975, 76. Sometimes we'd stay in monasteries. They have guest accommodation where you can stay. So sometimes we'd stay. And, generally in Christian monasteries, the monks They're what they call cloistered. They stay within the confines of the monastery and they never come out. But there's usually one of the monks who deals, whatever dealings with the outside world are done, he deals with them, including dealing with the people who come to stay as guests. So we were staying in this one monastery. It was Cistercian monastery. They're generally vegetarian, just as an austerity. So anyway, he was Brother Oliver. And Brother Oliver was dealing with us. We stayed there some days, and he was really nice, like a very soft person. And one day, we had some 8x10, like this size, little substantial size photos of Radha London Ishwara in Berry Place at that time in London. And we were looking at them and he walked by. And Brother Oliver, he looked and said, "Oh, who's that? Is that Krishna?" We said, "Yes." And Oliver said, "He's beautiful. Do you worship him?" We said, "Yes." He said, "Oh, yes, very nice," and walked away. And the next day he blooped. He left the monastery. And when we went back to London, we half expected him to be there, but he wasn't there. Anyway, Hare Krishna. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. But we must try to help to spread, in whatever way we can manage. Spread Krishna consciousness. Haribol. Jai Kadruta. Dharameshwari.